This is my submission for hashtag ToolFest 2021. Watch this video and then click on that hashtag below, see what other cool stuff other people are making. As is my style, this is going to be another junk build. I've got some pretty good chunks of cast iron here, and I am going to make a little tool maker's vise. Something like that. Obviously these two are going to become the jaws, and they're kind of roughed out already. I think it's going to be about a 3. It's about 3 by whatever this distance is. It's about 6. It should be a good size that won't overwhelm my little grinder. But I need to butcher this down, and then I'm actually going to try to clean all this stuff up as much as I can before I get into it. I don't even own a horizontal mill. So this got kind of clean. There's still some scale and rust on it, but I don't think it's too bad. This is traditional stock squaring, but this face is actually at an angle and the whole thing is kind of rough. So I'm going to pop a ball bearing in here so I just get one point of contact on this side. Overall, this cleaned up reasonably well. There's a couple little pockets on this side, so I'm going to make that the bottom. There's a little along the edge here, but I'm going to make this the top. Thickness is going about 900 thousandths, 23 millimeters. Already a little bit thin, so I don't want to clean that up too much. There's another little nick here, but I'm going to cut this down anyway. I want it to be about 3 inches. It's about 4 inches, so I have about 1 inch to take off. That's a lot to mill off, so I'm going to use the slitting saw to cut it off. Kind of eyeballing here how big I want these holes. I think that looks pretty good. I don't know that reaming these holes is really necessary, but it's not going to hurt anything either. To chamfer these, I've got the quill all the way down. I'm going to bring the knee up on the first one to get the depth I want, lock the knee, and then use the quill for the rest of them so they'll all be the same depth. This base is coming out pretty well so far, so I'm going to start figuring out the jaws. It occurred to me that using this piece, once it gets cleaned up, it's not really going to leave me a whole lot of height on the jaws. So I'm going to try to use this, take some pieces out of here. Best guess, this is like a sprue and feeder from iron casting, but I'm going to, do that. And then there is some porosity on the back of this, but I'm going to start milling it, see what I get out of it. That thing was really jumping around in the vise. It's just not a great shape to try to clamp. But now that I've got one flat face established, I'm going to turn it 90 degrees before I keep taking that down to size. Yeah, I don't like that either. The American Positive Grip Vise to the rescue. Need to make some dedicated hold down hardware for this thing so that I'm less lazy about setting it up. Now we're in business here. I did just an initial pass on each side so that I have something square with some dirty parts here still. The bottom cleaned up pretty well, probably a little better than I thought it would. That should be good. Right now this is about 1.40 inches, so I don't really want to take the height down too much more. I think I'm going to knock this face back to square it up. I've got this side cleaned up. I need to take all of this off, which is a lot more than I want to mill off, so I'm going to cut it off. This is actually the first thing I've cut with that saw, and I had to double check. That's the side I cut, and for comparison, that's the side that I side milled. Not totally straight, but really nice finish. I always worry when I'm setting up an angle block like this that I'm actually getting it tight to the angle block. So just a real thin piece of paper, push the angle block in. That's tight. That's tight. So that's good. Since I am going to grind this to fit, it's a little bit oversized right now. But now I'm going to see if I can turn this into the other jaw. Took me 3 tries to get a piece of stock big enough to get that piece out. I did it off camera because it's just a rectangular block. Drilled and tapped, counter bores on the bottom. Starting to look like a vise. I wonder what that's made out of. Because this is tapered and crooked, it's going to be kind of tricky to hold in a chuck, so I'm going to center drill it, turn between centers. I'm thinking that because this thing was originally a chisel, it was probably just hardened on the end and the rest of it is soft. I will try to harden this once it's done. One of the problems with making things up as I go along is I have to go back and revise things. This little screw looks cool, but it's actually sticking up above what would be the top of the vise. There's also not enough play angle-wise here to hit the holes the way I want. I'm just going to go back in, open this up from a couple different angles. There's a much better range on this now. It's still sticking up a little bit more than it should, but I'm going to wait until I have this all fit together to go back and resolve that. I flipped this around now that I have the head cut off it, just to use the end that's smaller, save some material. It would be more typical for a vise like this to be made out of some sort of tool steel and then hardened and ground, rather than cast iron, but it is possible to harden cast iron. What I've read about it, it's dependent on the composition of the cast iron. So for this it's sort of guesswork, and I did a couple sample pieces of some of the cutoffs. I shot for sort of the middle of the range, did a couple different temperatures. Testing this stuff with the files, it is harder than the raw stock, not by much. I did also harden the rest of the piece of chisel that these were made from, and that did get nice and hard, so that's good. So it's a question of whether or not it's worth risking warping or cracking this, doing the heat treating. Of course it's worth trying. I'm not going to learn anything by not trying it. This thing is going to mostly be used on my surface grinder, so any extra hardness I can eke out is going to be helpful for making it last longer. I did go back, try some more experiments on these. Ended up basically using the instructions for hardening Durabar, and it worked out pretty well. Came out ballpark Rockwell 50C, and the only downside is now I need to clean all this stuff up. I did some experimenting off camera getting this thing cleaned up. It turns out this guy is the best thing. That stuff is really tough to get off. I also did some tests grinding using two different grinding wheels. This one was with It's a 32A 46 grit. This one was with a 60 grit silicon carbide wheel. It's a Norton 37C. The surface finish on these is pretty close. The surface finish on the silicon carbide one is slightly better, which isn't surprising because it's what they recommend for cast iron. So I'm going to use that. When I flipped this and started grinding the top, I noticed that it was warped a little bit, kind of dished out in the middle. So I flipped it a couple more times. I've got this, I think, as good as I'm going to get it. And from doing a little inspection on it, what I can tell is this indicator is terrible. But in terms of the part, through most of it, it's pretty good. But then down here, it starts falling off pretty significantly. From here to the end is about 5/10,000ths, then it falls off a bit more here, but this is where that movable jaw is going to sit at its maximum extent, so the part's only ever going to be in here anyway. This is far from spectacular, but it's well within usable for the home shop. If I don't have a proper angle plate, I need to resort to some 1-2-3 block shenanigans. These are 3/8 thread on one end, 5/16 on the other. Now I can see how much I'm going to need to take off the screw here. Actually, instead of trying to eyeball that, I'm going to just touch off on the top of the vise, make a little mark on the screw with an end mill, and that way I'll have a good reference on how much to cut off. I don't remember which channel I got the idea for these from, but it's just a 5/16 rod. One is a clearance hole, one's drilled and tapped for number 10 screws. And then put some slots in the end and line those slots up with the holes. Just makes it a little easier to align them then. Took some fiddling, but there it is. So I want to grind this side flat and square to this and parallel to this face. So the way this is going to work is like that. Height-wise, I don't have enough capacity to grind this end, but I don't know when I would ever set it up on that anyway. I feel like my 1, 2, 3 block setups have been increasingly absurd, but this is the best way I could figure out how to do this 45-degree angle. So one last thing to do on this minor design flaw is when the little nut moves between grooves, this actually sticks out ever so slightly, which isn't a problem on the surface grinder, but if I have it bolted down on the mill or the rotary table, I won't be able to move it between slots. So I'm going to perfect. I tempered these in the oven. I'm going to clean them up a little bit, leave a little bit of the black finish on there, and call it done. As a bonus, I ground these into a matched set of parallels. It'll be good for just random setups. As always, not perfect, but I'm really happy with it. There are a couple slips I didn't show. I wish it was a little harder. I wish the parallelism was a little better. I wish it was a little thicker. But overall, I'm pleased with that. As always, thanks for watching. Enjoy the other Toolfest videos. If you like what you saw, please like and subscribe.